All right, I'm going to call to order Board of Education meeting, November 19th, 7 o'clock. Special meeting of the Board of Ed. Secretary, take attendance.
All board members are present.
Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, before we go through our candidate 2 finalist interview questions, again, I just want to go through sort of what happened today for our community out there who'll be watching this videotape. So today, similar to yesterday, we started out 8 o'clock here at Doyle, and we went from 8 till 11:30 to all of our schools in the district. From there, we came back where we had Mr. Durecka had lunch with cabinet here from 11:30 to 12:30. Then from 12:30 to 2:30, we had community members come here to meet Rob. Then from 2:30, went over to the Nature Center. From the Nature Center, we went to the high school where Rob met students in the media center of our high school from 3 to 4. And then from 4:15 to 5:15, Rob met with a bunch of our staff and educators from around the district. Then from 5:15 to 6:30, we had the night session at the high school where you met some more community members, and now we're back here for their second round of interviews. So again, I want to thank everyone who attended throughout the day in all the buildings, administrative staff who made us feel welcome throughout the day. And a special thanks for yesterday and today. I don't know if he's still here, maybe he went home, to Brian Goby, who chauffeured us around throughout the district. So thank you very much. Okay. With that, before we begin, similar to yesterday, Rob, so just in case, because some of the questions, so you're not writing down, spending the time writing down the questions, we want to kind of give you the questions in it right now so you can look at them as we're going through them.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes, we will take them back, after the interview is over. With that, we have prepared, and we will rotate between board members, 26 questions. So first question, I'll hand it over to Mr. Bank.
Thank you. What did you find most interesting, or what did you learn that you didn't know upon visiting our buildings today? And what did you see that you would like to improve?
Okay, well, first I'd like to, before I answer that question, I would just like to thank Paul and Lisa and Brian and Cynthia and Jackie and Jennifer and anybody who was able to be there with, I know there's work schedules and so forth, but it was really great to be able to get around the district and have a chance to meet and speak with different constituents, but also to it was really like a homecoming in a lot of ways for me to see some of the people I haven't seen in a while, and I really loved the day. It was very energizing. So thank you for that experience. When I saw the itinerary, I was like, wow, am I going to be able to hold up? But I'm full of energy right now, and I thank you for that. So to your question, specific to what I found most interesting and what did I learn upon visiting our buildings, I'm looking at the question here, and I found. Obviously, we're talking a lot about bond, we're talking about reconfiguring and so forth. That was affirmed with some of the buildings that I had seen. I think one of the things that really resonated with me was Eastover. Eastover's kindergarten rooms in the first front of the building, they're the optimum size that you would like to see. And then in the back, they're probably 2/3 of the size. There's not the open free play areas and some of those things. And they're doing a great job. I mean, walking through their building and looking at their literacy practices and some of those things, it's consistent between the rooms, and I think children are getting an excellent education, all those things. But from an equity standpoint, just putting a lens on it of a person who's in that community or as a parent, I would want my kid in the bigger room so that they could have those free opportunities to play and some of the things that were built in. So that really resonated with me as a specific example of why some of the need is to improve our facilities. I think we saw that in different ways, and some of them I'm in tune with and knowledgeable, but whenever I enter Lone Pine, I see a community of learners that's open and there's lots of things going on, but I also walked with the group to the middle of the building. And that's kind of a strange feeling when you're being buzzed in and you're walking past classrooms and so forth, and it's not an optimum for safety and security. So, I mean, I saw lots of concrete examples of things that we could do to improve our facility. But one of the affirming things that I saw, and I kind of alluded to it with the practices for literacy that I observed in Eastover, I saw those in Lone Pine as well. I saw those in Conant. I saw some consistency within our practices for workshop and literacy instruction. And that was very affirming because you build from the base. You build from your elementary when you're trying to make sure that all learners are prepared and ready for the next level of instruction. And I saw that consistency that we've been working towards. So, I mean, it was very favorable. That was something that I was very happy to see. And I saw a whole lot of happy faces too. It was great to see kids in action. I think that's one of the things that's really super important. Being out at Fox Hills, it was just so wonderful to see. I think they were 3-year-olds. They were in the 3-year-olds program, and their little faces were up to the edge of a little playhouse, and they looked at us, and they were pointing out at the little trikes that are in there, and they're like, "That's gross motor, you know." And I was like, "What are they saying? Gross motor?" And I was like, "Oh, they want to do some gross motor," because they have the little gross motor track in there. And, you know, they were about their routines, and the kids were clearly, you know, that sense of belonging, and you could see it in their body language and their smiles, and they were inviting me in. I was able to kind of interface with a group of I think they were also 3-year-olds, and it was just affirming that, you know, we service the children of this community, and that's our most valuable resource. You hear those things all the time, but it's like that to me is always a reminder that that's why we exist. And it was a great day. I really enjoyed it. Part of the question, I'm glad I have the questions, you know, what would I like to improve? I mean, obviously, facilities, I think that would be the big picture, is that we want to have equity across our district when it comes to facilities, but we also want to maintain student choice in their programming options. We want to maintain a breadth of programming, and we want to be cost effective when we are doing that. So some of those things with some of the groups that we've met with as well, it really resonates from a facility standpoint of building those cohesive communities with a common staff. If we can come up with a configuration that allows for staff to be grounded so that they're there each day and they can share in building that community. And I do think there's some great possibilities with a K-5, again, where your older kids can provide leadership and so forth within the elementary setting, and we can be less fragmented than we are. And so when you're looking at buildings and you're thinking about the way we're organized, sometimes you're seeing an empty room where potentially all rooms are full, or whatever the case may be. But more importantly, it's always coming back to the programming that we have, the choices for our kids, and building a cohesive staff that's working together. And I think some of our limits in the way we're spread out across were evident that that's an area of need for us.
Thank you.
Question 2 is, what is your vision for education here at Bloomfield Hills Schools, and what are your guiding educational principles? What would you like to implement in the district to make that vision a reality? And if you would like to reference specific researchers or writings that have guided your beliefs and vision.
Is that fair? There's 3 questions there. No, I'm just saying there. No, equity would be one of those things.
Yeah, with me, sorry.
All right. No, I think I'm going to answer that a little bit in reverse order for writings that help guide me in my thinking. I'm a big Carol Dweck fan. I think that last time when we were able to gather, I spoke about growth mindset. She's a Stanford researcher, and not new, but I think it's when you think about growth versus fixed mindsets and taking risk in our learning and those kind of things, I think that's fundamental to who we want to develop as learners and as teachers and adults that are also modeling learning. Duckworth is another person with perseverance, grit, and that notion of resiliency. I think she's important. I know that last year I was part of a book study that was around the notion of focus, and Smoker was the author for that particular book, and it aligns with Folan's work on coherence, but it's narrowing your focus and naming what is important for your organization and what are your core values and what you want to do to move learning forward. Those are folks that, influence my thinking. And, my vision for Bloomfield Hills Schools would really be representative of that notion of, as I said before, it's not where you begin, it's where you end, and finding pathways for students so that we can find success on multiple levels, not only students who might need interventions and supports, but also students who are making, that are meeting all the standards, but need extensions and need audiences beyond our school, whether that's writing contests and those types of things where you can write authentically for another audience. I was just talking about that with parents. And I think there's that opportunity out there that we need to expand on, maybe how we work with our professional learning and concentrate in the area of extending learning, not only intervening for those kids which is good work and it oftentimes applies across the board for all kids if it's good practices, but there are times when I think we need to be intentional about what we're doing to help teachers extend learning for kids that need a greater challenge. I believe that's important. Your second part of the question is, what would you implement to help BHS make the vision a reality? I think that a big part of all of this would be gathering information and listening and learning and working with the board closely for what your vision is as well, so that we could get a common vision. But I think that anytime you want to move an organization, is if the people in front of me and myself can come together on what it is that we find, like with coherent or have a focus and what it is that we want to move, that the organization working with me directly with our cabinet and our building administration and so forth to execute that and really work on measurables and things that are important to make that vision a reality, because we have great teachers and they want to do well, and I want to support teaching and learning at a level where families and so forth feel like the needs of their children are being met and that they're prepared for whatever that next step could be.
Thank you. How would you determine the strengths and capabilities of your key administrative reports, and how would you hold them accountable?
Well, I'm in a unique position, and I think I could probably work in that. I think I could have a fast start because I have already relationships with those key reports. I think that's how they're referred to here, administrative reports. Yes. I want to reserve judgment. I do at some point. You have to come to judgment in this position, but I want to listen. I want to learn. I want to know what their priorities have been, what they've been working on, where they feel supported or where they don't. And I want them to find success. I do. And I think I can see things right now that they've been doing that are having an impact on our organization and are helpful. But also as an end user in a building level right now, I also have a unique lens that I can bring to that conversation where there are things that I think would be helpful. I had mentioned before that I think it's important to have an organizational table that has duties delineated so that it's clear for not only families but also our internal folks need to know who's doing what's happening with professional learning calendars, what is it that, who do I go to for support if I need it? And it's probably out there. We just need to make sure that that's communicated to everyone within the organization. So as far as holding people accountable, I think that there's an important piece where they need to share with me what they're doing and why those things have been priorities, and we could set those goals together. I mean, that's part of the process of evaluation is naming goals. And I think that you need to give enough time to make sure goals are achieved, and when they're successful, then I'm successful too, and that we're in this together. It's a team approach. That's something I value and always have.
We are a high-achieving school district. How will you ensure meaningful, high educational standards are set, met, or exceeded? How would you communicate these objectives and resulting outcomes with internal and external stakeholders?
Well, I know that we know what the standards are. I mean, we know what the state standards are, and I think of those as a minimum. Okay, so we kind of know where to back plan from. I think we need to be more visible in those standards. I know that there's been work that's started and not completed, but we need to share with our community what it is that our curriculum, what our aligned curriculum looks like. And that's something that needs to be more visible. And then, you know, when we can tell the story, not only by test scores, but by other measures with students telling that story as well. I know we've gotten away with some of the things that we used to do with showcasing and some of those types of things, but I think it'd be important to highlight those times when students have gone above and beyond, or when we have built-in pathways and those kind of things where people can exceed what the goal is, and celebrate those more publicly. As far as communicating objectives, that's part of being either on the website to have that aligned curriculum, and what the standards are that we're trying to meet. They're out there. We do have that, but I think tying our aligned curriculum to making that visible in concert with the standards will be helpful. As far as the outcomes that we're at, I think we need to be visible about that and set goals for growth, continuous growth. And that happens through cabinet, through a building administration, and aligning, again, going back to coherence and focus and those things that I think school improvement plans need to line up with district improvement plans, which should complement our strategic plan. And within our buildings, those professional goals and the things that teachers are working on should align with those goals in a real meaningful way where it's part of their practice, not an add-on or something for accountability's sake, but something that's real and actionable.
How do you see the role of the foundation in partnership with the district?
You know, the foundation, it's one of those areas that we appreciate their support in the buildings and the grants and so forth. I had the good fortune to have a couple folks from the foundation be part of a focus group earlier, and what I said to them is I'd like to see them take on a bigger role. I'd like to see an endowment that's actually grown and could support a program, and it doesn't have to be a named program now, but I mean, is it something that it could be directed towards art education or growing the arts or supporting students who have needs that don't have access to the private tutor or those kind of things. I'm not sure what it would look like, but if the foundation could sustain a program, to me, that would be an easier way to raise money and name an objective of this is what our end is. And we need to articulate that in concert with what does school funding look like now compared to what purchasing power the dollars had 15 years ago. And looking at some of the studies that are out there, we've trimmed a lot of things around outsourcing and a variety of things in order to keep the dollars in the classroom, but we also know that it's about 80% on the conservative side of what it once purchased then. So the foundation would be important. In a grant, I mean, people might see grants as nice, and they are nice, but our teachers are fairly well resourced internally. It's extras that they're buying. I'm saying, like, building that foundation into something that can sustain like an athletics or an arts or something that is costly but important in the value and is important to the values of our community.
You've just walked into your first cabinet meeting. What is your primary message to your team? What do you want them to take away from that meeting relative to you as their boss, your vision for leading the district? Additionally, can you answer the same for principals and union leadership?
I think that,
There's like 14 questions.
yeah, well, yeah. Well, you know, I can answer the first one. I walked into the cabinet and I sat down. Okay, no, that's not a question, sorry. What's your primary message to your team? That, I think that it may be cliche, but that we are a team. And there's nobody above the team, and I get it that I have the title that says that, you know, I'm on the top of the hierarchy, but I don't care where the ideas come from, but I think it's important to listen and create a collaborative environment where there's also a lot of thinking going on. I think an important part about that is setting norms that are important. I think that should be done together in a collaborative way. And I have a norm myself. I want everybody's attention. When we're in a room, I think it's fair to say that when I left that first meeting, one thing that would be important to me is that it's not a meeting where I'm meeting with, let's just say, pick out anyone, HR. It's an HR issue, so I'm only talking to HR. I'm talking to the cabinet because we're in it together. And if you have an email that's that important that you got to do right then leave our meeting and do your email and come back. Because I want everybody's thinking around the table. We all have something to offer, and sometimes our perspective outside of HR is important too. So norming is going to be important to me. That'll be the one I write down. Everybody else will get an input on that too. But I feel strongly about that because we live in a distracted society, and the research supports that it's like 25 seconds to focus again. I don't need half of you, I need all of you, because it's a hard place. It's a hard job. It's a big job. We're working with kids and their life and how successful are they going to be. So I think that's one of the things that I want them to leave with the first time. The vision for for leading the district, like I say, it's collaborative. It's a we mentality. I've always been under the impression that, and that would be true for principal and union. I really don't care whose idea it is. I don't have to own the idea. It doesn't have to be me. We will all share in the success of it, and the love will come back around. That I know for true. That's been one of the most affirming things that this application has been for me, is that the community of people who've reached out and emailed me and said things, it's like, we knew you listened, you knew you were a collaborator, you were a team builder, Rob, and those are things that I just want people to know about you, and it's been so gratifying, humbling, and it really has moved me from an emotional standpoint. I really never, I don't know, I just think that that's important for us as a team, as a cabinet, to share that it's really, there's nobody above the team, and that we will together get there. And I believe in the cabinet we have. I believe in them. I know they can do it.
Rob, a few minutes ago you mentioned the arts, and it's a perfect lead into my next question. What is your philosophy on supporting the arts, and how would you try to build a sense of community around our arts programs across the district and the greater Bloomfield Hills Schools community?
Howard, I think the arts are central to our identity. They have been to the days of the Jack and Jills and Joan coming to the board meeting and talking about those days when we were in high school. I think it's true across music and fine arts and performing arts that we have to preserve that. That's part of our DNA as a community. I also feel like it's a great place that we can build those bridges to our greater community when we think about bonds and buildings and all those kind of things. One of those things surfaced during the course of today is how do we engage our greater community, and I think the arts are a wonderful place to do that. I want to put those invites out to our seniors or at the senior center or folks that don't have kids, but inviting them in and seeing what our young people can do, because when I remember watching Les Mis a couple years ago, man, I was like, wow, and people were on the way out. And I used to be Andover's principal, and we had a reputation to have a really fine arts program, and we did, and we had some really fine instructors, all those kind of things. But the chatter there was, I think that was even better than when Andover did Les Mis. And because, hey, we are one community, we have more talent to draw from, all those kind of things. And that's a pretty uplifting experience to see young people pour themselves in there and do a wonderful job. I think about that in our art curriculum, and I think about back in high school and trying to back when I was at Andover and trying to make the community feel smaller and give a niche for people and so forth. I used to go down and talk to the instructors, and I would say this, and I meant it in earnest. You're saving lives. You're providing a safe place for sometimes kids who need it the most, and they're finding their identity and they're having a way to express it in a safe way. And you see those same kids presenting at Traub or a variety of things that we do to recognize our arts, and I'm like cheering them on. We cannot lose that. That is central to who we are. And I knew that when I first got here. I was like, wow. Yeah, so I want to maintain that, and I think that's how we fund that, if it's foundation or general fund or how that works. It's central to who we are, and it's a differentiator for our district.
Somewhat the same question, but relative to athletics. What is your philosophy on supporting athletics, and how would you try to build a sense of community around our athletics programs across the district and greater BHS community?
Mark, I think that, you guys, it was a good idea taking me on all these tours, because it seems like these questions keep coming up. But, it's a similar theme, but I really think that I mentioned it kind of briefly. I believe we should be Blackhawks. And I said that today during focus groups, that we identify ourselves as Blackhawks because we're measured by our end product. We're measured by the high school, where kids go, all those kind of things. We understand that's the most high profile because the stakes are highest for kids that age. But I also think that from an athletic standpoint, we can do a whole bunch to build that on early on. I think we've had fits and starts of that, but we need to be consistent in that. If we have clinics that are run by our teams, that our players are part of that process. They're helping coach the younger kids when they're trying to do their exploration, the third and fourth grade POMS kids or basketball players, you name it. Kids see other kids as rock stars, and I've used this example a few times, but when our varsity basketball team is actually the varsity basketball team, and also I think it was when POMS came down, but when they came down and presented to kids at West Hills at that level, we had a hard time getting our fourth graders to go to recess because they wanted autographs. Literally, they were lining up to our high school kids and saying, "Hey, can I get your autograph?" That's how important it was to them. So if you're building identity, you build it early. And I know that living in this community, when I think about, my own experiences, and I'll say that my kids, at least one of them participated in camps at Brother Rice. And those kids were already Brother Rice warriors by 5th grade for many of them. They already knew that's where they wanted to go because they had that experience there. We need to get those experiences happening sooner and consistently in our district. I think that that's a way to say that someday you'll be a Blackhawk when you're older, and when a kid who's 17 years old says that to somebody who's 8, they're like, "Really? I can be a Blackhawk? You keep doing what you're doing, buddy, you're going to be a Blackhawk someday. And you'll be here at school." And, it's building that capacity and utilizing the resources we have that don't cost any extra money either. And I think the older kids also get a kick out of that too. They were, that was one of the things that resonated with the group that visited with us.
Thank you.
Sure.
So we're on question 9. The current draft vision for Bloomfield Hills Schools is that Bloomfield Hills Schools will lead the nation in educating and empowering every learner every day with compassion and integrity in a welcoming environment. What does this vision statement mean to you, and how, during your first 2 years on the job, would you go about implementing it?
That means a sense of belonging to me. When I look at that, lead the nation in educating and empowering, I think that that's a worthy goal, and I think empowering every learner, I think, is where we provide choice. We provide students an opportunity to go deep, to explore, have multiple pathways, and we do it every day with compassion and integrity in a welcoming environment. I think we are on the right track when it comes to social emotional learning. I think that building that capacity of trust and and understanding between peer-to-peer relationship is central to our classroom environment. I think kids should know the name of all their classmates in an authentic way around a prompt or something like that. There's ways to tie it to the curriculum as well. I think that the work that's happening in our district with not only like global, our global ed piece that we've been doing, but building capacity with kids to share those messages too. And there's lots of pockets that I'm aware of, not only at West Hills, but across the district with CAV time over at East Hills. There you have a model with older kids modeling for younger kids and a cohort going together, building that sense of community that we're in this together. Teachers in classrooms that are regularly around, circling kids up and building that sense of community, that sense of trust that we're in this together, so that when times get more difficult, there's another narrative out there. Well, I know he's not a bad, they'll have some other thing to say other than the one incident when something goes off the rails, because it will, because we're people. But I think it stems from the work that we're doing as global ed teams, and also and what we're doing with restorative practices. And I think we need to stay the course on that, because that'll foster that compassionate and an environment where it's welcoming, and it's built around trust-filled relationships. And during that time, I think that's again a point of emphasis that not only board and superintendent and cabinet can emphasize, but that's something that's a real actionable item for building administrators and teachers. I have those throughout my plans at West Hills right now, and I see those things happening in a real sense, and I'm very encouraged by it.
Thank you, Rev. So we're on number 10. This is another long one. Our community is a fairly robust size and with diverse levels of engagement. We value this engagement and inclusivity, yet we have had challenges and perceived lack of transparency and timely responsiveness. To this point, what do you see as the best ways to disseminate important information, such as student progress, district events, to both enrolled families and to the entire community as applicable? And how would you gather input and feedback?
I would start with input and feedback. I gathered some of that today. I think there's some holes in our communication right now, at least perceived. And if that's a case of educating our population on how we best communicate, then we need to name it. If we're going to rely on our broadcast, or maybe it's how you select, how you receive your messages. Maybe there's some concerns about that, whether you want an email or a text, or, sometimes I feel like I've won the lottery when I'm getting a message about my kid's lunch account. It's like, wow, I'm getting lots of notice here. And sometimes it's hard to please the public. It's sometimes like the question of over communicating or not communicating enough. So seeking input is central to this. And I think there's multiple ways to do that as well. But I have some leanings right now, and I think about my transition plan and those kind of things. If I were chosen for this job, I think town halls and so forth are valuable, because we can see the nonverbal in the room. We forget about that. Sometimes you never know how people are responding to surveys, and are we catching the people who aren't maybe as excited or as upset? Are we getting the middle? And I think that outreach is important. I think I'd want to solicit that through town halls, through superintendent dialogues, those types of things, and also working through our administrators and getting them to facilitate some of those conversations too. Or where are we seeing trends? Where is it breaking down? Because we have a robust system for communication, but we have multiple platforms out there. If I concentrate on just how do people understand what their kids are doing in class and how they're doing it, what are their grades and so forth. We have MyStar, but how the curriculum's delivered, we have people who are using multiple systems. Do we go to something single platform like Google Classroom? Is that where we should be, or should we be on Q Communication, or should we, it's when you have multiple platforms, that inherently creates issues with communication. And again, when we think about focus and coherence and those things, we can cut some of those things out. People are very busy. They they're living a life, you know, and if you have to dig and you want to support your kid and you spend your time and energy on that, it's a struggle. So I do know that, I'll give you an example of, during our curriculum nights, I had a parent come up to me and say, yeah, I'm part of the Google Classroom. I know that the teachers have invited us and all that, but see, I sometimes have a break at work at around 4 o'clock and I'm not home until 7. But I try to get into the documents that they've uploaded and I can't get into them because the default for Google Doc is anybody with a bloomfield.org address. But you can click on it and say anybody with the link can access it. It was a real small thing. But for that particular parent, it was a big deal. It was a big deal. They're like, and so I checked in with them. I saw them during conferences and they said, oh, no, I'm getting in there now. No problem. It's fixed. But again, if each platform has these nuances and you're in a schedule where you have multiple teachers and you're not in a single team like middle school, it can be very frustrating navigating the systems sometimes. So I think a single platform when you're talking about grades and those kind of things, not grades, but like actual work and documents that they're working on would be helpful. I think MyStar, we've found a way to make that work for the most part with, you know, how and where kids are at with assignment, turn-in grades, that kind of thing. The communications, I think buildings still rely on their broadcast, but there's a lot of individual teachers that are messaging too, and I am getting some feedback that's saying, you know, I'm getting all these individual messages. I don't need all of these individual messages. Why can't we have like a one-stop kind of thing? And you know, in our building, we link our Google Sheet. It's just a simple sheet. All the kids in 6th through 8th grade, you're probably familiar with it. The homework for each and every subject's there. And if you want to, if your child needs that level of oversight and a parent wants to do that, that's an easy place for them to go, one place, you know. And those things are always a struggle because technology changes and so forth, but we could do a better job of systematizing some of our communication and finding out more about that and so forth is an important part of that as well. Oh, Ms. Brown, yeah, it's been...
As you know from the building tour, we are proud of our nature center and farm. In addition to what the district already has in place, what would you do to leverage the farm and nature center?
I really loved being at the farm. I didn't spend much time at the nature center. I loved those two, but I spent quite a bit of time at the farm. Kids interviewed me out there today too, which was really neat. I wasn't really, you know, they had prepared an interview for me, and they were, you know, they're a tough group potentially, you know, but they were nodding and like I saw. I think I connected with them. I hope so. But as far as the farm, it's neat to see the energy that's out there right now, and I think the programming and so forth that we have is good, but we can expand what we do out there, and it was neat. I was able to catch a few minutes with Alan, the manager of the farm out there, and some of the ideas about, you know, whether it's walking trails, or we talked a little bit about why not the business of agriculture or the business of managing a farm, or there were things they were talking about with with a garden, and why couldn't you have kids that were tying their careers or their work-related experiences to that, or having a store out there. He was suggesting, you know, and this was not my idea. I mean, this was his idea, but I'm like, why not have a store out there with all kinds of Blackhawk swag available? He says he has 40,000 visitors a year out there. Why not? Why not? And why not have that be around students who might be in DECA or marketing clubs or business oriented, heading to college in a business career? Why not have a store there? Why not have opportunities for work related experiences for kids, but also why not with the business of managing something like that and creating marketing plans and in an authentic way? Because I think there's more to be had out there. I mean, there's all kinds of what I would think are, you know, individual, if we're looking for extensions and kids are specializing, why not? Why couldn't we have like independent studies where kids do things that they dig into? If they're into classification and fauna and all the things that happen with science, why couldn't they do some of that work right out there? Or what about partnering with urban gardens and bringing out community from other communities and say, hey, look what we have here too. Can we work together? Can we help take action to feed those that need to? Or can we market our produce? Whatever it is. I think there's lots of those opportunities, and I would welcome being part of that gardening group, get back to my carousel roots. So I think that'd be great.
Number 12, how do you deal with an incident of racism, anti-Semitism, or other forms of discrimination after the community has become aware of it?
I think we have to be honest. I think we have to be timely. I don't think we need to spend a whole bunch of time crafting a message. I think the message needs to be succinct and clear. We have to protect the privacy of those people involved, but we also need to be transparent enough. We've learned that over time, that we need to be timely and get it out there and know that it's being investigated, that it's important, that we don't tolerate that in our society, in our community, in the community that we represent. And I think that depending on the situation, if it's something that is a teachable moment, and I know there's been some incidents in the last year or so where I think it came to a resolution that was a teachable moment, and there were consequences, but there was also an opportunity to change. And I spoke to a group about that earlier today, and I think it was the first focus group, and I brought up the notion of restorative justice and restorative practices in a real sense from a world standpoint. I mean, it's important that kids know that this isn't something that is unique to us, but we could bring up things like South Africa and apartheid, and when we had a majority population in a country who was oppressed and then took over power. What an incredible act of leadership and courage to look at a way of reconciling with who your oppressor was. So we're open in our communication. We don't sugarcoat it. We live in a world where there's a lot of people who feel like they can hate. People have been given license. I've never seen it in my lifetime, but when I watch Charlotte, down in University of Virginia in Charlottesville, people will unmask with, khaki pants and burning torches walking through the streets of America. We have to be the place where we come together. This is public ed. This is where people from all different backgrounds gather, and we need to be the agent that recognizes there's things that are problematic in the world, but we don't sit back and endorse it or in any way kind of sugarcoat it. We tell the truth, we deal with it, we learn from it, and if it continues, then we have to find a way to deal with it more harshly than a teachable moment, perhaps, but it's not who we are and what our beliefs are.
What is the best practice to ensure all 504s and IEPs are being implemented in the various buildings?
Best practice is starting with the end in mind. I think we involve our legal counsel, our special ed director. We work on training, common forms, common practices. We start from there. We make sure that message is consistent across all districts. I know that some of that training is already happening. And then we have regular check-ins quarterly to make sure it is being implemented with fidelity. And we stay the course on that.
How would you respond to a parent who claims that her or his child is not being challenged enough in school? How would you specifically like to address the needs of advanced and accelerated learners? And do you see this as an issue enveloped under and possibly in conflict with equity and inclusion?
I don't see it in conflict with equity and inclusion at all, because when we think about equity, it doesn't mean equal. That's true for not only underserved and students who need interventions, but it's also for students who need extensions in their learning. So I think it's equitable too if a child's not being challenged. I mean, I think from a practical sense, I would obviously work through the chain of command. I would probably work through my cabinet officer that it makes sense that they, if they needed to, or I'd go directly to the principal and have them check into what in fact is happening from the teacher's perspective, because I don't want to forget that it's the lowest level is probably the best level because the student's in the classroom with the teacher. But if those conversations have happened and we've gone through the building and it's come to our level, then I do think that it deserves more scrutiny on my part. But I also think that when we think about advanced and accelerated learners, we've concentrated. I did, it's a little research on some of this during the course of this week, and a lot of it deals with selection process and how close kids are to whatever the criteria that's set for who does well and a gifted and talented and who doesn't. And I've used this reference earlier today when I think about Gladwell's work with David and Goliath. We compare ourselves to who we're around, and sometimes a standalone gifted and talented program for a kid who's on the margins, they don't generally play up. They generally feel that they don't, the general research is that they don't feel as able. They feel lesser than because they compare themselves maybe to someone who's higher within that gifted and talented pool. That's one concern that I would have about that. But I also feel like we could devote some of our professional learning to how best to extend for kids who need the challenge. And some of that, I remember doing recently professional learning last year where we talk about, I'll use an 8th grade teacher that I used to work with. His was not really like super scientific or anything. It was regular and consistent ways for kids to share their voice beyond the classroom about taking action about a cause. Sometimes it was personal about a challenge they might have overcome, or maybe it was about a core democratic value or something that they felt strongly about. But there's a lot of contests and those kind of things that people can write or kids can write for another audience. And I've seen that work very well to challenge kids to go beyond what the minimum is. That's just one example, but I'm sure there's lots of other ways too. And some of that is something we could be intentional about with our professional learning as well, to help grow some of that. But overall, I mean, also right now, let's not forget that we do have challenge problems and extensions, and there is a lot of differentiation that's going on depending on how you're assessing, if those assessments are built around growth mindset and getting to that level that's, in our world, at least at West Hills, it's an 8 would be the highest level that you can get at, but that's really developing the learner in every way that meets the criteria that's being assessed.
What is your philosophy on diversity amongst the administration and staff, and how would you go about increasing this across the district?
I think that we should be a representative staff. We should mirror our constituency. I don't think we're there yet. However, I am seeing some real positives when we're talking about the resources and the things that are in front of children right now, being reflective of who they are as well. And I think that's a small step. I know we have partnerships with National Equity Project and those kind of things, but in a real sense about how do you address it from a hiring standpoint. I had mentioned last time when I was with you was we were going to look at trying to be early to the table, staffing early, being intentional about partnering potentially with, I didn't say this last time, but getting out to the job fairs, knowing what our staffing needs are early. I think partnering with the university would be a really good way for us to bring in student teachers and work collaboratively with them to help develop them, service a need for the university, and at the same time a need we have as well, because we need to be representative of our population. I think that works for all of us. It helps. It does. The research supports that too, and it's fascinating when I've read research regarding, like, say, African American staff, African American male in front of a 4th grade boy versus a majority population teacher. and the struggle that the writer was actually a person of color who was writing the article that I had read, and they were like, I know that you have to be intentional about how you do class placement, all that kind of stuff, but at the bottom line is I'd put all the black kids in there if that was the only teacher in the building like that for boys at that age. That's how important it was to this person and their perspective. So if we're not meeting that need, we need to be intentional about that and find ways to do that. So staffing early helps, because I know that it's also hard to find the right candidates that are prepared and ready to go. Sometimes we're not always perceived as a district that is as welcoming as it needs to be. But if we were to do student teaching and partner and have that sense of belonging coming into it, then maybe we could increase our yield on candidates coming in that are diverse, not only limited to African American, but all groups. And I think that's something that we can improve on.
Okay, question 16. Please give us your thoughts on school funding, public school funding. What changes to the way schools are currently funded would you lobby for, and which would be beneficial for Bloomfield Hills?
I've kind of alluded to this during my conversation tonight, but when funds have been diverted and stuff over the previous decade, in the end, our funding has not really kept up with inflation. And in a real sense, we've been forced into, public education in general has been forced into a corner to where we have to find ways to cut. And I think, we have outsourced our custodial, we have outsourced our food services, and those were driven by financial decisions to try to make sure that we could ensure our programming for our students, and those are tough decisions. So to me, that's a piece of data that says there needs to be changes on how funding is done. We've been in Proposal A now. I think Proposal A was passed 25 years ago, somewhere right in that window of time. And, because of these changes, it's not meeting the needs for public ed in general. And I do think that, when you think about common good and the community, public ed needs to be a place where we all come together, not just in Bloomfield Hills, but in Michigan in general. Qualifying all that, you're a local board, we're a local community, whatever lobbying and so forth, it needs to be from the perspective of a resident of Bloomfield Hills and the interest of Bloomfield Hills too, and Bloomfield Hills students. So, I know that the changes that have been in place at first seemingly would work, but I know the promise of sales tax and in a growth economy, you'll share well in the golden years, and you'll have to have your fund equity in place for the lean years. The rules have changed on us, and so there needs to be some changes in funding. And I would work closely. I know some of you are probably much more well versed on school funding, but I think when we have individual meetings and agenda and the things that are important for me to do as a lobbyist would be those kind of things, and that would take me out of our community, but also knowing that this is the community where I live and who I would be representing.
Thank you. How do you maintain great support services for our students when the district faces budget constraints?
And that goes back, it kind of ties into the question, the previous question. It's finding that balancing act, and our kids, and they deserve the best, and the support services that are in place there. I think we have to examine what's there and what's needed and so forth, but we also we also have an expectation in our community. We have multiple tiers of support here that some places don't have. We have learning specialists and interventionists that used to be called GERT, and that's another tier of support, but it's also a very important tier. So before we cut anything, I think we have to look at still examining where there are areas in the budget that could be ways to save money before those services were removed, and I'm not in support of removing them at all. But again, this is a global question for our state as to how we increase our funding. And I know that we presently have an administration that has proclaimed that they want to make sure the funding's in place that's necessary. So maybe it's an opportunity for us as a state and as part of the state to have some influence on that, because I don't want to lose the great support services we have.
What suggestions or decisions have you implemented in your own school when facing budget choices? Please provide examples which demonstrate having the least impact on classroom.
What suggestions or decisions have you implemented in your own school when facing budget choices? We're pretty fortunate that we feel pretty supported in our schools. Sometimes we have to say no to some of the extras for trips and so forth, but we've also, and I think it's a good opportunity to kind of say how do we bridge gaps when we want to make sure that we're equitable and inclusive. I'd like to bring up our Warrior Fund. I'm very proud of our Warrior Fund. It's not taxpayer money that should pay for school trips for kids to go to Washington. I don't believe that's the case. And but it costs around a little over $600 for an 8th grader to go to Washington. I am so proud of our community because we have never denied a child the opportunity to go to Washington. So some of that, that's not so much a building budget, but it's building systems in place to make sure that we're equitable. And it's an outreach intentional practice that we've been doing for years. It's like we had 83% of our kids go to Washington this year, and the other, I think it was either 21 or 23 kids that didn't go. We made a personal contact with them, either through the counselors or through the admin in the building. Just want to make sure that if you want to go, we have a way that we can make sure that you go. If you have other plans and so forth, that's fine. We're not here to harass you into going on a school trip, but we want you to know it's an option. And so over the years, we've had I think many as 8 sponsorships, and that comes from our community. It comes from those dollars like our Life Touch vendor that we use. Every school gets a check back for the number of pictures that are sold and so forth. We put that in our Warrior Fund and our permission slips. And this is not something, I need to give a lot of love to East Hills. They were the first group to have that template in place. We borrowed it, and it has on there, from an equity standpoint, on any permission slip, you can check off my son, daughter, they're going to be on the trip with you. My son and daughter will attend, here's the fee for the trip. These are like extensions, like in local trips that we're taking to maybe to a Spanish trip or something like that. And there's one box that's like, my son or daughter will attend, here's the money for the trip, and here's a little bit more. You can put it in the Warrior Fund. And we've systematized that, and there are people who regularly donate additional funds along with the picture rebate and some of those things. And the PTO, we have a great partnership with our PTO. They give us a donation each year as well, and we keep that money percolating. But I said this earlier when I was talking about this, I also, when I make the calls, and I make a lot of those calls, I'm like, hey, we really want your son, your daughter to go. This is how it works, and I just want you to know it can be anywhere from $0 you can contribute to I can do half, or I can do $10, whatever it is. But whatever dollars you give go back into the Warrior Fund, and that can be applied to a future trip or the need of another student. And I believe in having skin in the game. I think if you can pay something, that's why co-pays work with medicine to some degree. It's like it's important to them too that they contributed, and I think it also brings some dignity and pride, and it's not something for nothing. But if there's a need that's great enough, then that's okay too. That it's $0, it's fine. We don't spend a lot of time on it, but we have the conversation, and I think that's one of those areas where it's been really it's been great to see us grow that, and it's a point of pride for us. I share that with our family when we do our school trip, and families, I should say, and it's a good thing.
What is your philosophy on tutoring? If achievement is low or dropping, in your view, should the students be seeking extra support? Should the extra support be the responsibility of the family or the district?
Well, I will say that teachers have hours before and after school. There's a few minutes there too. And I don't want to dismiss that, because I always had this expectation for staff is like, if a kid comes to you and says, I need extra help, I think it's your responsibility to find time to help them. You may not be able to help them to where they need to be, okay? But if you invest in them and provide that time, often that's the extra nudge they need. So I don't want to say that some of that's not teacher responsibility, because it is. And I'm not afraid to ask people to work harder, okay? The other part of that is tutoring from a philosophy standpoint. There's also, there are people who tutor their kids who are at standard level, they're proficient, and they want to be ahead of the rest of the group too. In that situation, good, go ahead. It's your responsibility to pay for it, because we're meeting the standards, and I think that's where it's a fair baseline. For those kids who, from an equity standpoint, are unable to meet the standard, they've sought out the supports that we have and those kind of things, and there's an interest, I do think that there's room for transportation, some of those needs that we could probably arrange to make sure that there's an opportunity. But I really think that that's something that deserves a lot more consideration. I think it's a conversation that's bigger than just me. You're asking my opinion on that. And I do think that tutoring is a reality, and it's not going to go away. And I also, whether it be music or whether it be math, I don't think it's a level playing field if it's only those who have the means in order to get that. And so I think it's worth considering as an option for kids who need it. And if they're willing to show up, put the work in and so forth, maybe it is additional support. If it's we have staffed in the past where we've had hours after school where you flex a person's day and it goes beyond the traditional day, but that's an expensive option, because then you're looking at a 0.2 of a 1.0, and you're talking about tens of thousands of dollars when you start looking at a contract employee. So there's lots of issues with it too. You've got to factor in union and what can contract allow for and so forth. But I would go back to the beginning where, teachers in middle school are to report to school at 7:50. Our kids start school at 8:15. There's some window in there. And I think that if a kid extends themselves to you as a teacher and they say, I need extra help, then that's why we're there. I do believe that.
How would you fund that?
How would I what?
How would you fund that?
Well, if their duty hours are 7:50 till 8:15 before kids start, I would like to look at what we could do contractually, but I think there's a conversation to be had there without additional funding.
We skipped 20 because it was combined. We just figured out with another question. So it's redundant for me to ask it. So it's fine. Go ahead, Howard.
Really simple question here. What do you think about high school start time being later, and then also for middle school? And what are some of the obstacles to adjusting start times, and do you see these obstacles being surmountable?
Students asked me that same question today. And it's one of those areas where the research is pretty clear. I taught first hour when I was a teacher at the high school level. And I've also taught those same kids on the other end of the day when we had a flip schedule or something was going on funky with the schedule. Totally different people. And I live with an adolescent that's 17 years old who I drive to school every day, I might add. And his bus for OTEC leaves at 7:15. So we have to get up even earlier than the 7:25 start. And he's been a trooper, but he's tired. Because at night, a lot of times he's still awake, he's still going. And I think that if the research says that, and I'm for it philosophically. I'm not against changing the start time, but I appreciate the second part of the question because you give me room to kind of dig my hole with adjusting start times and what do you see as insurmountable. I think the natural, having been at Fox Hills this morning, there was lots of energy in the room at 8 o'clock or so in the morning. They were wound and going. All these little people were ready to go. But when I think about elementary age kids, I think there's a struggle there with the family, and I worry about buses and darkness and those things about getting their child safely to school. So I mean, exploring that and how many kids would that impact, I think one's too many in some respects, because you don't want to ever risk anybody's safety. I also think there's some practical obstacles when you're part of an association or part of the OAA athletically and extracurricular wise. We would be on a different start time. And if that was the case with competitions and we needed to travel and so forth, I think you would, as a byproduct, have students missing more instructional hours, instructional time. Having worked in Port Huron, which is in St. Clair County, we were part of the MAC conference, which is part of the Macomb schools in Chippewa Valley and those districts over there, Utica. We would have frequently students who were leaving for baseball games or whatever it was. So there was a bigger burden on them because of the travel time to the games, because we were so far away that they would miss a lot of class time. And I think we would see some of that as a byproduct. But would the overall, a later start time service the needs of our students? And I think that's really what the decision has to be really framed from, is who do we support and what group would benefit from that? It would be kids, because the research says that. That's what research is about. And I don't think there's anything out there that really tests that it's better for kids to start earlier. How much we could adjust it, and how much would make a difference is interesting to me. I don't know, but I know that the few days this year my wife has taken Nate to school and I got a half an hour sleep, and I'm old. I was like, yeah, I got an extra half hour sleep, So I think it's something that is more doable if there was a cohort of other schools that would be willing to enter into that as a pilot or to see how that would work. But it is something that has been talked about a long time, and there are some other districts that have done it that don't rely on the transportation schedule that we have. But I do think that I would frame my thinking around what's best for kids and what the argument says with start times.
So you do see the issues being, the logistics issues being surmountable, that we could overcome?
I think we could.
Thank you.
Question number 22. Two-part question, both asking for personal examples. Can you give an example of A, experience with district-wide curriculum alignment efforts? And second, can you give an example of experience of leadership provided at the elementary, middle school, and high school levels?
All right. I will use a current working example right now with district-wide curriculum alignment efforts. I'm going to go back to literacy. I wasn't part of the visitation teams, but with our current LST, they formed a team of visiting admin and teachers and teacher leaders, and took a look at what did workshop practice look like across our district when it comes to instruction for literacy. I think you probably heard the phrase more than a few times. The only consistency was that we were inconsistent. All right? And so how does that look now? Now that we've been into implementing that for a while, and credit to, I've tried hard not to name people, but I'm going to say Kimberly Hempton was probably the lead admin on that piece, in concert with her team and so forth. But she also provided learning opportunities for us as admins so that we could articulate what was happening around classroom libraries, around annotation, around Calkins resources that are available, all those kind of things. And in working as a team with her, it was a nice bridge for me back to 4 or 5 classrooms, and actually throughout our 6-8 as well, with Liza's leadership as well as a teacher leader. it's neat to see that. That's one of the things I saw in the building tours. We saw some common practices across district. And I think that those are the things that will really provide the foundation for success later on. And we're seeing some of that success now in some of our elementary scores and so forth. So that's an example of a district-wide curriculum alignment effort when it comes to, sharing that. I've also seen that in other ways, but I also know that you all have families. So I'm going to skip to the second part of that question, all right? Experience of leadership provided at the elementary, middle school, and high school levels. When we're talking, is that specific to curriculum?
Mr. President?
All right. Well, I think that this is one of those areas where I'll work backwards in my career here a little bit, but in the high school, I think about how we shared kids and how difficult the logistics had become. But one of the taglines that I brought in there that stayed with me at West Hills is, "It's great to be a Baron." And
I've always
yeah. When I first met Howard, that was like we were taking a tour around Andover, and I'm like, I had to get you a Baron shirt. Remember that? Yeah. That being said, I think that was one of those times where I felt like as a leader, it was important to maintain our identity till it was time to transition. Because for the kids that were in our building and the families that were in the building, and that's all about identity. I mean, Mark, you have a Baron jacket in your closet. I know you do. And I have, I think that those things are shared experience that we have as a community. And that was very important to me. And it was very difficult. I felt a lot of loss there too. I did. I really did. I liked my gig. I liked my job. I liked my stuff at that time. But it was important to take a perspective that was community based. It was bigger than the people at that time in the school. It was bigger than all of us. And trying to help shape that identity of a new identity and a new beginning was important, and it was important for all constituents, not only families and students, but staff. And I can remember assuring people it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. And I said that a lot. And I said it as a lame duck, too. I did for a whole year. I was a lame duck. I never want to be a lame duck again. It was hard. I still was included in the game. I got to come to all the planning meetings. We were working our 2,000 item list of what we had to do to build that project, but it was tough. And I wanted to be supportive of my colleague who was taking over as the principal, and that was the backdrop for me to go to middle school. So I'm tired. I get a little weepy. I get a little sentimental. But I think about when I transitioned to West Hills Middle School, and I remember kind of playing a similar role of like, I'm very excited to be here. I'm so glad to be a part of your community, and I meant it to some degree, but there was some doubt in my mind, like, am I going to be a 4-8 guy? Am I going to fit here? I've never taught elementary school, and I think from a leadership standpoint, I came in and I said to my staff in the 4 or 5, I'm like, hey, you guys know a lot more about teaching and learning when it comes to 4th and 5th grade. I'm not going to be able to tell you that. I need to learn from you. And I was open about that with them, and they embraced me and welcomed me in. And it was really, it's what I needed. It wasn't what I didn't know I needed that, but it was what I needed, because developmentally having those experiences at the middle level and at the elementary level helped shape who I am now and to think about what it means to move forward. So, that was also an opportunity to help, lead, and I felt it was a transition. At that time, it was the second time I had followed the previous administrator, who was a fabulous rock star administrator, but we had much different styles. And, at that point, I think the staff needed somebody who was a little more visible in the building, and that was what I brought to them, and they embraced me, and I am eternally grateful for the staff of West Hills. I love working with them. I do. I think that as a group, I've learned a lot from them. And it was an opportunity to grow our practices there. That was during my tenure there. We've moved to, standards-based grading, and we've really brought our task-specific rubrics alive when it comes to the IB assessments and process for assessment. And those are things that have been actionable tools, measurable tools to how do we bring a growth mindset alive? How do we continue to grow our students and their engagement, and to continue to engage until they reach a high standard? That was an area where I feel really strongly about. And from an elementary standpoint, I think that's also true, that we may be 40% elementary at West Hills, but we are 100% together as a staff on that growth mindset piece.
Thank you.
Okay, rounding the bend. The build-outs of the strategic plan are not finished, and that was an intentional decision by board and administration when we knew we would be in a superintendent transition. So Rob, can you give us an example of one or more SMART goals that you would like to see built into the plan in any one of the 4 goal areas, which are academic achievement, financial stewardship, high-quality workforce, and communications? And for the community, SMART goals, SMART is an acronym, and it stands for specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and timely.
All right. I missed something here. I'm going to go back in here real. High-quality workforce. All right. Specific. All right. Some of the questions have revolved around diversity. We are going to increase. We are going to. I don't know how. I used to be. Students will be able to. That used to be what we had in college. But a specific goal would be to have a representative workforce. Take steps towards a representative workforce, and that would be true. Not only teachers, but support folks, and making sure that we are representative. That would be the specific goal. I think it's measurable by actually looking what our current demographic is and seeing what progress we can make 1 year from now. Because I think you have to look at it in a cycle of staffing is done annually. We're in a position right now, it's November. In our traditional schedule of how we do things, we're naming new classes and soliciting that input for the course description booklet that's coming up in January, and we're sending out schedules cards to kids, and they probably do that online now, but they're getting their course requests, which drive our schedule. So I think that we have to look at that process to make sure we're timely enough to know what we need to forecast for how many teachers we need. And we'll look at we would look at our enrollment in those predictions as well. So we have a specific goal is increasing our diversity of our workforce. It'd be measurable, I think, in 1 year. Our action items, I think we'd want to look at are achievable. Whether it's achievable or not, I think that we would have to look at what our practices are right now, what we've been able to garner. I know that we've been active in job fairs, and we've been looking at inventories and so forth. We already have predictors of some folks that are out there in the pipeline, and I think that continuing that process and also making contacts with universities and their placement offices would be a good thing. I think it's realistic. If we don't do it now, when will we do it? If not now, when? I mean, it's kind of one of those things that we've talked about this before. When can we get there? And timely is, I think that now is the time to do that.
How would you try to ensure we do not lose students to private schools, which is our largest competition for enrollment? What steps would you take with families thinking or considering going to private schools?
Some of that is that back planning from the brand, and we talked about being Blackhawks and bringing those relationships down where there's peer-to-peer contact with older to younger kids, and saying, that aspiration piece that I want to be a Blackhawk. And also, one of the things that I've done some, mostly informally, but I've reached out to people and say, hey, help me understand what it is that you need from us to say you matriculate from 8th grade to our 9th grade high school. I had a conversation during one of our football games with a parent who's had kids choose another school, and they were they weren't super critical of high school, but it was a lack of surety for them, for that particular case. They were like, I'm just not sure, and this I feel is more of a sure thing. And I would go as far as to say that, you know, coming up with a reasonable survey or contact, whether it be at the building level, a counselor, an admin, you know, someone asking, why not us? You know, some kind of exit interview. We could learn from those. And then also, you know, I think it's realistic to say that if we've done all those steps and we've worked hard to build our brand, there are sometimes people, you know, there are other reasons too that people go other places, but I don't want it to be because they're not sure that they're going to get the best education for their child in our district. If it's truly around a faith-based decision or something like that, I respect that. I do. But if it's because they don't have confidence in us as an organization, then I want to know what it was and why they feel that way, so that we can work to improve.
Thank you.
How would you connect our community that is without school-age children to our district? How would you build community to the greater Bloomfield Hills residents with our district?
I think this one's one I've spent some time on, but, you know, and I think that partnering and inviting people in, some of the things that you can do with purpose is a very important part of life. And we know some people live a lot longer when they have purpose, and some people give up because they feel like they don't have value to their life. We can be a part of that. We could be intentional about bringing seniors into our elementaries. We'll definitely get a check on them. We'll do an iChat. But, you know, that being said, I do think it's important that we are intentional about bringing people in, and also by bringing our kids to places where we can be of assistance to people too. And it doesn't always have to be elderly people. It could be folks that are, you know, new to our community. Check out our arts. You know, have them go to a concerto concert. If you aren't impressed after that, when you see our kids out there soloing with a full orchestra behind them, if you've seen it, I bet all you have, but it's amazing. It's amazing. Let's tell our story in a way where we are, you know, we are reaching out. And sometimes we get mired in all the things that happen in the daily life of school, and sometimes our energies are focused on things that aren't positive, because that's what the deal of the day is. But the reality is, there are so many good things. We need to do a better job of telling our story and inviting people in. And whether it's our kids going, and some of them are old-fashioned things that we used to do, like raking leaves and stuff for seniors, have them sign up. I was part of that before, where I got us into a jam one time, and we had a bunch of us. I said, I need some help. Well, we had 30 of us out there raking leaves and everything else, and, you know, it felt good, because when you're at a certain age or something and you can't bend over and pick up those leaves or do that, or maybe your budget's fixed or whatever the case may be, they say a different narrative about you after you've provided the service. So intentional acts of service, expanding that outreach as well is a good thing. And you know, earlier in one of the groups that we were with, a parent said, you know, I'm worried because some of our people in our community say they only want to build relationships when they need money. Okay, and we're in that stage where we might be asking for some money. I mean, so I said this to the group when they asked that question, is like, well, then we need to be transparent about that. I'm sorry that you feel that way, and we'll try to do better. We want to do better by you. And in actions, that's part of IB too, is taking action. And there are ways to do that, and you feel good when you help other people. So do kids. We need to model that.
So finally, I have one final question, whether or not you have questions for all of us, but I'll pause there. Similar to last night, I think I'll allow each of my colleagues to ask one more either question or follow-up, and we'll kind of go in the order where it ended up going yesterday. So I'll start, and then it went this way. What? Oh, you do tonight? So, all right. But I'll start in fairness in how we ended up going last night. So just as a follow-up to Cynthia's question, and you answered it in terms of losing students, and you'd have an exit interview process. But more specifically, what would you do to try to identify those students before it became too late, before their decision was made and then we're looking to try to save them after the fact? That, seems to be a problem that we seem to realize after the fact, that a lot of students, will not matriculate, whether it's elementary to middle or middle to our high school.
We do a fair amount of surveying, or have historically. I would think that, it's sometimes it depends on what people will disclose, but I think a reasonable question is, are you considering other schools than our high school? And if you are you comfortable sharing your name? I mean, I'd call people myself if it came down to it. It's not, I always feel like it's a loss to me when someone leaves us. I personalize it even now. And sometimes it's the right call. I mean, sometimes it's, I also say to people, if you want a homogeneous environment, then we're the wrong place for you, because we value diversity. We value that. And some people want, they want single things that we can't deliver and never will, and we don't want to. I don't think we want to do that. I mean, we value diversity. So if you want a single faith school or something like that, then probably you need to go. But I think early on, trying to figure out a mechanism to determine who we are at risk of losing due to their perceptions or their experience that they've had, so that we can repair that relationship, we can retain their child in our schools, and we can make their experience a more positive one in our school district.
Thank you.
How would you handle parents that complain, and also parents who complain a lot?
Listen, and then listen a lot. But also, I would ask them if they've had an opportunity to work through their building, through the teacher, if it's a teacher issue, if it's about their parking lot, have they talked to their building admin, is it about teaching and learning, have they used the proper chain of command? Because that's one of the things that sometimes I think we have to make sure that we try to keep it at the lowest level for the benefit of the people who understand what's happening. And I also think that some of the problems we have need to be proactive communication on our part, because our teaching staff is probably the best communication that you can have with a parent or a family, is that you're proactive in your calls. And it's not just to say, Johnny's not getting it done in class. It's also to affirm when they're doing things well, and being proactive about reaching out. I still believe in a telephone. I very rarely put bad news in an email, because people sometimes read more into it, or they don't hear the tone or the inflection I intended when I write something. If I have something that's a pretty serious thing, especially in this particular case with, like, when you're thinking about a parent who's complaining, it's usually around their kid because they love their kid, they want what's best for their kid. And if they're getting an email response, I think that sometimes falls short. I know it's hard to always, make a phone call, and sometimes you have to do it before work or after work when you have time to dedicate to that call. But if you're in conflict with somebody and you send off an email, my prediction is it will go poorly most times. So I think that human component, I've said that a lot today, it's important. It's important. It's a human business. We're imperfect. Sometimes we have to say we're sorry, and we'll work on it. We'll make it right. Sometimes it's just being listened to and problem solving and finding out what it is that's the core issue. And I think that those things have proven to be helpful for me over my career and with the staffs that I service. I'm proud of our staff. They're very proactive about their communication. I think it's important to get a hold of the parent first sometimes. I think it's good to give the adult perspective. This is what I perceived happened. And a lot of times truth is very relative to the situation too. But from a practical standpoint and from a communication standpoint, it helps as a parent to know that you're going to have a kid who's coming home upset or something like that they had a tough day and this is what happened. We're partners. We share a common interest.
Rob, if we select you to be our next superintendent, recognizing that there's experiences in leadership that you haven't had as a superintendent, what professional development or mentorship kind of opportunities would you be looking to take advantage to enhance those skill sets?
I probably would want to go to some type of superintendent academy or some kind of boot camp. They have those for principals, and I'm sure they probably have them for superintendencies. I'd like to align myself with a mentor who has a lot of experience. I don't know if through the Michigan School Board Association or through the Superintendent's Association, whether there's a mentor program. But I think that would be very valuable for me, because I do know that looking at research of first-time superintendents, they sometimes try to go too fast. They sometimes stumble on. Here I am doing I said I promised I wouldn't do my Porky Pig, but I'm getting tired right now. But I started to do it. At any rate, that being said, they, I think I would definitely elicit the support of people who've been in the job. I need that, because this could be a lonely gig here, and how do you navigate 7 strong personalities? I mean, you all have opinions, and I work for you, but I also work for the community and want to do it the best way that I can.
Thank you.
So we're trying to be unbelievably consistent in questions upon the 2 days. Mine can't be exactly the same, so I'm going to do this as equitably as possible. And so last night I repeated a question that a parent had asked Pat Watson in the afternoon. Okay. And the question to him was, you know that our other candidate is internal, known very well to us. Obviously that has its advantages. So the question to Mr. Watson was, what would you say to the community? What do you bring to the table, and so forth? So, Rob, to make it a similar but not quite the same question, I would ask you, what would you like to tell the community about how you would take your new role into perspective in terms of what disadvantages it might be to be an internal candidate and have all those pre-established relationships? And how would you like to address that in terms of a brand new role for you?
Thank you for turning that around, because I see it as a positive, but I want to speak from what would be a perceived negative of this is one of the things that I think may be a misconception for our community, because I have had a lot of support. At least people have sent me a lot of emails saying that they're going to reach out and they want me to be their person and all those things. And I think there may be a perception that I have a difficult time saying, no, this guy's a nice guy. He just maybe he's a placater, a perceived placater. Those kind of things could maybe be a narrative people could craft if I'm coming into a job from an organization that I've been living in and building deep relationships with community and all those things. And I think it's important to recognize that for the community, I've had difficult conversations with reports to me, with parents in this community. I've said no on multiple occasions, but I think I start with the end in mind and the why. I think people deserve an answer for why. If you go into something without a clear why and you can't articulate it, whether it's a lesson plan for school or whether it's building a building or whatever the case may be, you'll struggle. And I think that people should know that I start from that perspective, and I would press those people around me. If they can't answer the why, then we probably need to continue to explore where we're heading and what we need to do. So I wouldn't be afraid of Rob Durecka as being this person. I know it's outside of what our community has typically done when it comes to hiring a superintendent, but I also recognize there's parts of this that I would say are strengths as well, and I won't go into those because that's not the aim of the question, but I don't think strong relationships are ever an obstacle in the end. Even with people that you care about and you know a lot about, it's like family. You sometimes discipline your children, but they don't stop loving you. You're doing it for a reason because you care and you can answer the why.
Thank you.
Last night I asked a question about outsourcing, but you touched on it briefly enough that I'd like to ask a different question tonight, if I may. Going back to question number 13, which had to do with 504s and IEPs, you and asking what the best practice to ensure all 504s and IEPs are being implemented. You said start with the end in mind, and if you could elaborate on that for me, I'd appreciate that.
Well, I think that 504s, IEPs, I mean, they're guaranteed by law. And we need to make sure that we're first following the law and that we're meeting what we've agreed to meet the needs of students that are specific and individualized in your IEP as well as 504. So I start with that in mind, that we're going to meet the law, and then how we best develop practices would be through consistent message and training that we do internally in concert with our legal counsel, and then that message is worked through our counseling staff so that it's consistent across our district, and how we implement and how we make sure that our teachers, even though they have it, I mean, sometimes it may be inconsistent in how that's shared with people. It's, here's the plan, take a look at it, or is it time dedicated during our Welcome Back Week where we sit down, and I know that that's been our practice in our building at West Hills, is that those plans are shared with the counselor and with our support folks, our special education teachers, our GERT teachers, formerly GERT teachers, but our learning specialists, and there's a lot of new vocabulary, and our interventionists, but that these are the things that you need to know about this student. You're getting them. They know that before they get that student in front of them, and they need preferred seating perhaps, or there's a deficit in their hearing, so make sure you sit them on this side of the room because the ear that they hear well out of this side of their head. Whatever the case may be, it's specific. Maybe it's allergies, whatever it is, that we're proactive and we do that on the front side because that best meets the needs of kids. And I think that some of those practices in alignment right now, there's been a training, I think, last week, and it's set up to be done quarterly right now, and I appreciate Jen and Jeff that they're making sure that process is standardized.
During our conversation this evening, you used the word equity a number of times. I was wondering if you could give your definition of equity, and how will we know when we have achieved equity?
Equity is what meets the needs of students, whatever their specific need may be. In my mind, I think about there's a difference between fairness and equality because you often hear equity isn't necessarily fair. I mean, sometimes we have populations of students who need additional supports, and that's what's equitable for them in order to meet their need. And I think that that should be central to our mission, because sometimes there's a notion that I think about. I'll try to give a concrete example of how that plays out in the school setting. Outside of finances is the easiest thing, to provide opportunities for kids if they don't have the means to go on a trip or something we talked about earlier. I think that that's a good example of where we extend ourselves beyond what would be the same for everyone, because not everyone has the same need. It's kind of for each according to their need, and I think it's important to do that. These were just a guideline, weren't they, Lisa? There really wasn't 29 questions or whatever, 26 questions. All right, I'm sorry.
That's why I like to say ish after everything. Like Jennifer, I can't ask the question I asked last night because it was unique to programs that we don't offer here. So here's what I'm going to just throw a different one. We hear a lot that in this district we sort of steer kids to an end goal at the end of 4 years of high school, college, and even sort of pigeonhole into a few different colleges, Michigan State primarily. What options are there? If college, there's 50+% of kids that will not complete college, start but won't finish. Right. That's what the current data says. What other alternatives can you think of that would be acceptable to parents, that may be a better fit for some of our students?
It's a struggle in our community because it's interesting. Early on, kids norm themselves around college is what we do, and it's going to be either this college or that college. And I think we need to capitalize on some of those students who've made use of some of the other options that are out there, like OTEC. OTEC is one of those underutilized pathways that we have available to us, and that's an area where it's really changed. The facilities changed. There's options for pathways to work that are in combination with college as well. We're funding for school. Some of the jobs that are out there that they'll pay for their school while they're there. They're terrific. It's not only a financial incentive for parents, but it's also an opportunity because you learn a lot through work. I mean, I think that's a real meaningful extracurricular for kids in some ways. It acts like that for those that choose work as that option, but we don't do that enough. I think we need to highlight some of those success stories that are out there. I can think of some kids that have done that pathway, have been successful, are now getting college paid for by their employer while they're making an income as well, and they have the dignity that comes with work and purpose and all those things. We need to expand on that. There are other options that are out there, but I also, I'm cautious about middle college and some of those things that are programs that are rock solid programs that are housed inside of schools like West Bloomfield. And, I probably shouldn't say that, but that's a good program for a lot of kids. Now, are we able to maintain coherence and focus? And we have a DP program, and we have AP program. We have, do we have the cohort size to support that, sustain that? Does that make sense for our population? And would that be popular with our population? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that, but we could also expand our senior experience. I'm a big proponent of building those partnerships with community for whether it be in our own assets like the farm, but providing work-like experience through internships. Kudos to you for putting interns in place this year. That's a great experience for those kids. And I think that we could be more meaningful in developing those partnerships and look at our senior experience. That second semester of high school, we all know acceptance letters have already gone out. Unless you really mess up, you're going to go to that college you've been accepted to. So why don't we have more opportunities to put them in the workforce from January to the time they leave for school? They may learn a lot. So I would look at ways of growing that practice as well.
And then finally, do you have any questions for us?
I have 13 questions, but they're all 8 parts. Okay, so no,
Get a copy of them
at this point, no, I'm not that guy. But at this point in the evening, I'd like to thank you. I want to be your next superintendent, and I appreciate the process. It's been an opportunity for me to learn and experience a lot of different parts of our community, and it's affirming to me that I live here and I'm a part of this community. I'm proud of it. So I really don't have any questions for you. At this point in time, I think I'll leave it to you. And again, I thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Not done yet. Well, we're not done yet.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Really appreciate you being here.
Thanks, Rob. All right, go have a beer. Thank you.
I haven't called for it.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
So, just one first thing, any public comment? And then just before adjournment, just to kind of outline the process for tomorrow night at 7. So we'll have, similar to, if you remember the final 2, we'll have a bowl with numbers in it. Everyone will pick a number. Everyone will have up to 10 minutes to go and talk about their candidate that they would like to move forward with. We'll go around, and then obviously, everyone will select a candidate. From there, we'll have more deliberation, and then at a point in time after the additional deliberation, we'll make a motion. Okay? With that, I call for adjournment.